The morning my sister kicked me out, she handed me a trash bag and told me to be gone before dinner. I was 17. I had a backpack, $43, and a phone with a cracked screen. My sister stood in the doorway of the house. Our parents left behind the house with the bay window. My mother used to sit by every Sunday morning, and she crossed her arms like she was waiting for a delivery truck to pull out of her driveway. "You can't stay here," she said. "I have my own life now." She was 26. She had just moved her boyfriend in. I had been sleeping on the pull-out couch for 8 months, ever since our parents died in a car accident on the I-40 outside of Amarillo. I had not complained once. I cooked. I cleaned. I stayed quiet. I thought that was enough. It wasn't. I remember standing on the front porch with that trash bag and not crying. I think I was too stunned to cry. The neighborhood was very still. The oak tree in the front yard had this long branch that used to scrape against my bedroom window at night, and I remember looking up at it and thinking, I will never sleep under that sound again. That was the thought that almost broke me. Not the bag. Not my sister's voice. Just that one branch. I called my aunt from the end of the driveway. My mother's older sister, Carol, lived about 2 hours east in a small town outside of Memphis. She had a house that smelled like cedar and old books, and always had a pot of something warm on the stove. She and my mother had been close in a quiet way, phone calls every Sunday, cards in the mail for birthdays, a visit every other Christmas. After the accident, Carol had come to the funeral, held my hand through the whole service, and told me to call her if I ever needed anything. I had not wanted to be a burden. I had tried to make it work with my sister. I had lasted 8 months. Carol answered on the second ring. I didn't even finish explaining before she said, "Stay where you are. I'm coming." She drove 2 hours in the dark and put my trash bag in the trunk like it was a perfectly normal piece of luggage. She didn't ask me a lot of questions on the drive back. She put on the radio, low, and handed me a granola bar. And when I started to apologize, she said, "Don't you dare." I moved into her guest room that night. The bed had a quilt her mother had made. There was a lamp with a blue shade on the nightstand. I lay there in the dark and stared at the ceiling and made myself a promise that I was not going to waste this. Living with Carol was not easy in the way that comfortable things are easy. She was a retired school principal with opinions about punctuality, effort, and what she called the quality of your choices. She pushed me to finish my senior year at the local high school. She sat at the kitchen table while I filled out college applications and corrected my essays with a red pen without apology. She drove me to my first job interview at a medical records office and waited in the parking lot. I worked through college. I took out loans for what Carol couldn't help with, and worked evenings at a hospital billing office, because it was the kind of job where I could study between calls. I graduated with a degree in health administration. I was 22. Carol came to graduation in a yellow blazer and cried, which was the only time I ever saw her cry, and she held my face in both hands afterward and said, "Your mother would have been out of her mind proud." I got a job at a regional hospital network in Nashville. I worked hard. I got promoted. By the time I was 28, I was managing a compliance team and had just been offered a director role. I had a small apartment with real furniture that I had picked out myself. I had a savings account. I had a life that I had built from that trash bag and $43, and it was mine in a way that nothing had ever been mine before. My sister and I had not spoken in 11 years. She had called twice in those early years. Once when she was getting married, I think she wanted someone from the family there. Once when she moved to a new city, I'm not sure why. I didn't answer either time. I had nothing against her exactly. I had just made the decision, quietly and completely, that I did not owe her access to the life I had built. She had handed me a trash bag. The door swings both ways. Carol used to ask me, gently, if I wanted to try to repair things. I told her honestly that I had repaired myself, and that was enough. She didn't push. That was one of the things I loved about her. She understood that some doors you close not out of bitterness, but out of self-preservation, and she respected that I knew which kind mine was. Carol's health started to decline when she was 71. Nothing sudden, a slow accumulation of things. Her heart, her knees. She needed help with the house, with appointments, with the paperwork that seemed to multiply every year. I drove out on weekends when I could. I hired someone to help during the week. I was not doing it to be repaid. She had pulled up in the dark with her headlights on and driven 2 hours to the end of my sister's driveway. There was no ledger for that. I just wanted her to be comfortable. We had long talks in those years. She told me things about my mother I hadn't known, how funny she was. Privately, away from people. How she used to sing off-key in the car on purpose to make Carol laugh. How she had worried about me specifically, her quieter child, wondered if I had enough armor for the world. Carol said she thought I had turned out to have more armor than either of them had anticipated. I was 31 when Carol sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table, where she had red-penned my college essays and told me she had updated her estate documents. "I want you to know what I've done," she said, "because I don't want it to be a surprise, and I don't want there to be any confusion later." She had no children of her own. She had a house, a modest investment portfolio, and a life insurance policy. She had divided a portion to a literacy nonprofit she had supported for years and left the remainder, which I would later understand to be just over $2 million when the house and accounts were totaled to me. I told her I didn't need her to do that. She said, "I know you don't need it. That's not why I'm doing it." She handed me a copy of the document. She had also, she told me, written a letter to accompany it, which was stored with her attorney, explaining her reasoning in her own words. She said she was a woman who had spent 30 years as a principal, and she had learned that any decision worth making was worth documenting clearly. "Nobody is going to challenge this," she said, in a tone that made me believe her. "But just in case someone is foolish enough to try, I've made sure there's nothing to challenge." She passed away 14 months later. A Tuesday morning in October, her neighbor called me. I drove out and sat in her house for a long time before I called anyone else. The service was small. She had asked for that. Flowers from her garden, a few hymns, her friends from the neighborhood and from the school where she'd spent her career. I sat in the front pew and held myself very still. My sister showed up. I did not know she was coming. I had not told her. I don't know how she found out small towns talk. And my mother's family still had connections scattered through that part of Tennessee. She came in just before the service started, wearing a black dress I didn't recognize. And she sat in the third row like she had every right to be there. I stared straight ahead. After the service, at the small reception at Carol's house, my sister found me by the kitchen door. She looked older. Not in a bad way, just older. She had her hair pulled back and she was carrying a plate of food she hadn't touched. "It's good to see you," she said. I said, "I didn't know you were coming." She said she felt like she should be there. That Carol was family. That she had always liked Carol. I nodded. I said, "I need to go check on a few things," and I walked away. She stayed for an hour. She hugged people I didn't recognize. When she left, she stopped near me and said she hoped we could talk soon. I said I hoped she had a safe drive. I thought that was the end of it. The call from my sister came 3 weeks later, while I was at my desk reviewing a contract for a new vendor system. My phone buzzed. I almost let it go to voicemail. I don't know why I answered. She started with small talk, which was odd. How was I? How was work? She heard Nashville was really growing. Then she got quiet for a moment, and I knew something was coming. She said she had heard about Carol's estate. She said she understood Carol had left things to me. She said she thought, given that Carol had been their mother's sister, maybe there was a conversation to be had about what was fair. I put down my pen. She said she wasn't trying to cause problems. She said she just thought, given everything, given that we were the only family either of us had left, it might be the right thing to consider sharing what Carol had left. I said, Carol made her wishes very clear. My sister said she understood that, but Carol was elderly, and she had been under my influence for the last few years, and she wondered if the documents really reflected Carol's true intentions or whether I had, and she paused here, searching for a word guided her in a particular direction. I was very quiet for a moment. Then I said, I'm going to stop you there. This conversation is over. If you want to pursue this further, you can contact Carol's attorney directly. His name and number are in the estate documents, which are a matter of public record. I'd encourage you to think carefully before you do. She started to say something else. I hung up. I sat at my desk for a few minutes. I was not shaking. I was not panicking. I was thinking about a cedar-smelling house and a quilt and a woman who had packed her car in the dark and driven toward my trash bag without hesitation. I was thinking about a letter, stored with an attorney, written in Carol's firm and careful hand, explaining in her own words exactly what she had decided and why. I called the attorney that afternoon. Not because I was scared, but because Carol had spent 30 years making sure her decisions were documented, and I was going to make sure I understood every layer of that documentation before my sister had the chance to make a single move. The attorney's name was Thomas. He had handled Carol's affairs for 15 years. He walked me through everything with the kind of calm precision that told me he had seen this kind of situation before. Carol's letter, he explained, was thorough. She had written it 2 years before she passed, updated it once 8 months before her death, and it was notarized and dated. In it, she described our relationship in specific terms, how I had come to live with her, how I had finished school and built my career, how I had supported her in her final years, not out of obligation, but out of genuine care. She wrote that she was of sound mind and full conviction. She wrote that her decision was entirely her own, and that she had consulted Thomas independently, without my knowledge, before finalizing anything. Thomas also told me that Carol had done something I didn't know about. She had prepared a supplemental affidavit, witnessed by 2 of her neighbors, stating that no one had pressured or influenced her estate decisions. She had told Thomas she wanted it on record in case anyone tried to complicate things later. She was, Thomas said, with something like admiration in his voice, a very prepared woman. I thought of her red pen on my college essays. Yes, she was. My sister retained an attorney 5 weeks after that phone call. I received a formal letter questioning the validity of the estate documents, citing Carol's age and our relationship, and what her attorney described as a potential pattern of undue influence. It was 5 pages long. It used words like isolation and dependency and manipulation. I read the whole letter at my kitchen table, slowly, the way Carol had taught me to read anything important. Then I put it in a folder. Thomas and my attorney, a woman named Patricia who came recommended by a colleague and who had the energy of someone who genuinely enjoyed this kind of thing, responded within 2 weeks. Their response was thorough. It attached Carol's letter. It attached the affidavit. It attached records of Carol's independent meetings with Thomas. It attached a statement from Carol's personal physician confirming her cognitive clarity at the time of each document signing. It attached records of the literacy nonprofit that had received its portion of the estate without any dispute, which rather undermined the idea that Carol hadn't known what she was doing. Patricia told me that challenges like this were more common than most people realized, and that the documentation Carol had put in place was, in her professional opinion, unusually solid. Whoever prepared your aunt's estate, Patricia said, knew exactly what they were doing. She had been a principal for 30 years. She had seen what happened when things weren't written down. The response from my sister's attorney came 6 weeks later. It was much shorter than their initial letter. They were withdrawing the challenge. There was no admission of anything, no apology, just a quiet retreat in 2 paragraphs. I was at my desk when Patricia called to tell me. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat for a moment in the particular silence of something being finished. I thought about the phone call where my sister had used the word guided. Said it carefully, like she was being delicate, as if I had spent years manufacturing warmth in that cedar house, orchestrating Sunday phone calls, learning to make Carol's specific recipe for chicken and rice because some long game required it. As if love was something I had faked for financial positioning, I thought about the trash bag. $43. The oak branch scraping the window. I got up and made myself a cup of coffee and stood at my kitchen window looking out at Nashville in the late afternoon. The city was doing what it always did, moving, building, humming with itself. I had built a life in it from nothing, from a cracked phone and a granola bar, and a woman who drove 2 hours in the dark. My sister called once more, about a month after the withdrawal. I don't know what she expected, maybe an opening. Maybe she thought the legal thing had just been a formal process, and now we could go back to talking like family. I picked up. She said she hoped I understood she hadn't meant any harm. She said it had just been a lot of money, and she hadn't known what else to do. I said, I know. She said maybe we could try to rebuild something. She said we were the only family each other had left. I said, I need to be honest with you. I don't think that's something I want right now. Maybe not ever. I don't wish you anything bad. But what you did both 11 years ago and this year, those are things I haven't forgotten. And I don't think pretending otherwise would be good for either of us. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she understood. I said I hoped she did. I said goodbye. I put the phone down. I didn't feel triumphant about it. I didn't feel sad. I felt like someone who had made a clear-eyed decision with full information and was at peace with it. That's a different feeling than winning. It's quieter. It sits better. I donated a portion of Carol's inheritance to the same literacy nonprofit she had supported. It seemed right to continue what she had started. I kept the rest and put it toward a house. Not a large one. Just something with a yard, something permanent, something mine. There's a tree in the backyard that reminds me, a little, of that oak in front of my parents' house. Different species, different yard. But on windy nights when the branches move, there's a sound like something scraping gently, trying to get your attention. I don't find it sad anymore. Carol used to say that the goal wasn't to harden yourself against the people who hurt you. Hardening takes too much energy and leaves you rigid in all the wrong ways. The goal was to grow specific, to know clearly what you would and wouldn't carry forward, to choose, on purpose, what your life was made of. She did that. She documented it. She signed it in front of witnesses and stored it with an attorney and told me about it at the kitchen table, so there would be no confusion later. I think about that a lot. Not the money, not the legal letter retreating in 2 paragraphs, not my sister's voice going quiet on the phone. I think about a woman in a yellow blazer at a college graduation, crying, holding my face in both hands. That is what I carried forward. That is what I chose. If you're watching this, and you've been written off by someone who was supposed to protect you, if someone handed you a bag and pointed toward the door and called it your problem, I want you to know that what comes after the door is yours to build, completely and entirely yours. No one can take credit for it. No one can inherit it. No one can show up 11 years later and call it shared. You built it. From whatever you had. That's not a small thing. That's everything. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment below. Tell me the part that hit hardest. And if you know someone who needs to hear that their story isn't over yet, share this with them. I'll see you in the next one.